My guest today is Aria Mae Everts. Aria is an expert in transforming the lives of conscious leaders. She does it through spiritually integrated coaching. She gets to the root of blocks so that one's deepest life purpose can be experienced with serendipity and flow. Her clients include founders, authors, TED speakers, scientists, and creatives who believe that together we can create a world where all life is honored. In this episode, we talk about 1. The journey to be whole, integrate all our parts. 2. Creating and holding space between yin and yang. And 3. The power of stories. I wish you to enjoy my conversation with Aria Mae Everts. Okay, we're recording. Thank you, Aria. Thank you so much for joining. So there's a lot to unpack based on what we spoke about earlier. I'm particularly interested in the book, but I don't want to be only talking about this today. So I don't know where the conversation is going to take us. And maybe just to start, why did you accept this interview? Just in terms of intentions. What do you want to do today?
Yeah, it's been just really fun to learn about what has been coming through you with the events you're creating and the vision that your heart holds. And being, I think, just introduced by a friend to your work last year and then connecting with you through the website, just feeling the synergy across the Atlantic and some of the vision for folks to come more into themselves, more into their purpose, more into their like a sense of wholeness and healing. So that's why I'm excited to talk to you too today.
Lovely. Lovely. And for the people who join, in a nutshell, because you do so many things, I would not know where to start actually.
Uh-huh.
What would you say about yourself?
Sure.
Who are you? What do you do?
Yeah, in a nutshell, I'm mostly at this time working one-on-one with clients, either virtually or in person. And then I also have experience working with groups and bringing people through also retreat-like experiences in that sort of setting. So my focus in that work with folks is on coming into their hearts, coming into their gifts, coming into a sense of fulfillment in life, breaking through blocks, challenges, old wounds, old patterns, so that we can really live a vibrant and nourishing life.
What touched me the most from you and what you wrote, and that's the reason why I wanted to have this conversation, is the integrating parts of ourselves that might be shameful. And particularly interesting because those parts of ourselves that might be shameful in the broader society are parts of power, right?
Mhm.
Which is weird, right? Because power, you would say, okay, I'm gonna show it to people because that's beautiful. And my dad has been a healer since a very young age, and he's always been telling people about it. It was not shameful at all.
Yeah.
At the contrary, and I remember being, oh my god, oh god, like in a restaurant you would go when people are burnt or whatever, you could see something was weird about someone or skin problems or anything that was appearance,
Mhm.
he would go and talk to them. And
Mhm.
for me, I wanted to hide in a hole. I didn't want to be there.
Yeah.
And he was doing it over and over again.
Yeah.
I learned to live with this. And so I know this shame. Clearly my dad didn't know it, or he was having a fun with it, but that resonated very deeply with me, what you wrote. Also because most of the education I got was very scientific, and so there's no really a space for the things you write about and the things that my dad was doing. I think it's been very recent that I integrate those two parts in my life, and I was particularly interested in that perspective of yours. So can you tell me what compels you to talk about this through the book but also today, and yeah, your own journey with that of having a gift, of having power and not really knowing how to express it to the world?
Absolutely. Yeah, clearly one of my favorite topics since I've written extensively at this time around this. I actually really resonate with the story about your dad that you just shared in some sense of that with my father. His lifestyle being very alternative, very close to the earth from a young age, this awareness that he was different, that he was like out there. And in I think in witnessing that break from society that he chose through being like a biodynamic farmer, living close to the land in that way. I was very aware. Also had those moments of wanting to stick my head in the sand and just be normal. Can I just get a teen Vogue and wear Abercrombie and Fitch over here and just fit in with the crowd? And that shaped me early on for sure, being in an environment where someone was going against the grain. And for a long time, I did try to fit in. I went to college, I got a job, I did those normal things that normal people do. And then at some point along the way, I just realized that simply wasn't authentic for me. And that my expression of who I am, when I really allow that, when I really face the shame of some of those hidden parts, that there was all of this like freedom and possibility that opened up in that space. And it really was through the process of, in my early 20s, encountering a body of work called shadow work, which is what you're speaking to. When I hear that, I think of shadow work is how do we embrace the parts of ourselves that we've put into shadow along the way, we've tried to hide, and actually allow the beautiful gifts of those things to shine through.
What would be the process of shadow work? It's about identifying and then expressing them. And
Yeah,
what's the specific steps, or what is it?
yeah, yeah. It's more so. It's interesting because you're asking a little bit, and just to give listeners a context, the book that I've written, which is a draft, it's not out yet, but the premise of that is that we can access spiritual gifts, and through and to give some examples of that, it might be like intuition. Let's work with that for a moment. The gift of intuition. When I can perceive information that I don't really have a logical way of knowing, it's more in the field of consciousness, and I'm tapping in maybe with clairvoyance or clairaudience or some other way than one of the five senses to know something. And so, in that, if I were to come up with an example for that, like maybe when I was little, there could have been a moment when I expressed intuition, and those around me, maybe my caretakers, didn't really know what to make of that. They didn't really know how to hold that, or maybe it got judged, even. Maybe there was a teacher at school or someone in a religious institution who saw my intuition and shut it down. And so, whether that was benign or it came with more weight around it, I could have put my intuitive gifts in shadow, so to speak. I could have hidden that part of myself away and stuffed it in a shadow bag, so to speak, and decided I'm never going to be like that again because that wasn't safe. That didn't feel good. I need to turn that off, turn off my perception, and so that I can fit in to society. And so that might be a way that it could happen where one of our spiritual gifts isn't so available to us.
So that's the process how a shadow is formed, and how do you put it back into light?
Yeah, it's always a choice, right? So I always like to really emphasize sovereignty in my work, and that there's nothing that anyone ever should do or needs to do, right? So it's an option. And from there, awareness that maybe there's a sense that something is there that you're missing. And often our triggers can help us understand more about what might be in shadow. And also, we can have golden shadows, they're called in this body of work. And a golden shadow is something that I admire about someone that I myself have put into shadow. I'm not embodying it yet, but I contain it because I can spot it in someone else. So if we really put someone on a
Hmm.
pedestal for something that they seem to have that we don't think we have, that's a good clue that there's some shadow work to do.
And when you do, I feel I'm repeating the question, but I really want the answer.
Okay.
So what's the step? Let's say that I decide I want to put it in the light. It's just very simple, right? I just start doing it, or I just start tapping into it.
Okay.
I start learning about it. I start a quest.
Yeah, let me go a little bit into that process. I see. So in that case, then, okay, we have the choice point, like we have the awareness, and then we want to embrace it. Then the process would be actually going back to the original wound, remembering the time when the shadow was created, when we put that part of ourselves away. And so typically we have access to the memory. Sometimes we don't, but we're trying to go back to the earliest point that we can remember where something was shut down and what the story was that we created around that. So, what are the thoughts that I believe about myself? Often there's self judgment there, right? And then from there, working with that younger part and working with the part that developed to keep that younger part safe. So it becomes parts work for anyone who's been in therapy where that's a model. And
Can you repeat the term? What is the term?
yeah, parts work, like a part, like there are different
Work.
of the self. Yeah. It's actually then from there really working with that. And it's not like an overnight thing. It's actually can really take
Yeah, I can
quite a lot of
imagine.
time. I have shadows I've been working with for years. The intro in my book that you read, right? Of this part of me that's afraid of being seen, because it's like I'm a little out there. I can that shows up still, right? And so I work with it regularly, and it's that compassion, bringing compassion to it, noticing fear around it, and tracking. We call them shadows because often they're not seen, and so it's like when we have access, when the light is shown on a shadow, it's, in my experience, not always because I'm choosing to. It actually can come as quite a surprise, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
that's been in there operating in me. Okay, let me give that some attention. Is that clear? It's an abstract thing to talk about. I could give an example, another one if that would be helpful, but
Yeah, go for it. I'll just tell you what I understood so far. So
yeah.
there is, as the process to go back, right? So there's, as you spoke about, two specific entry points, let's say. There's one is the awareness. Second one is the invitation, or do I accept this invitation from me being aware that there's a path in front of me, or like a junction, and I can go and light my shadow or not, and you take the decision. And then in terms of decision, there's a work with the memory, the earliest memory. This memory brings you to an identity question that you basically work on with kind of having two hats. You have your younger self, like the basically personalizing this the person that was hurt, or self
Mhm.
that was hurt as a young person, a younger self, and having two kind of adults, the adults that took the former adult that took care of that wound in a
Mhm.
way that is not productive for you based on your decision, and the new adult that you are today, which want to basically replace that pattern with a more productive pattern based on the decision you make with this invitation. That's what I understood.
You
And
nailed
but yeah, if you have an example,
Yeah.
I'm really interested.
Yeah, yeah, you did
For me, it
total.
sounds like mental. It sounds like mental work,
Yeah.
like very complex work. But I understand it's like the six thinking hats, basically, of De Bono. Basically, you try to understand the problem from different perspective, and by personalizing it, you can actually do work with the different personas.
Yeah, yep, exactly. Yeah, it is very cognitive. It's like weeding the garden of the mind. But then what it gives access to is actually more embodiment, more being in our body as a more full version of self through that process, in my experience. And yeah, it's not easy. It's not simple. It's actually to actually heal these things requires quite a lot of discipline and commitment. And but the rewards through that process, right? Like by going through the complexity and the pain of it, like shadow work is painful, can be, right? Because like one of the things I've witnessed in myself and in working with others is sometimes the it can be so sneaky, the self-judgment of we see something that's been operating as a shadow, and then when we have that awareness, it's the self-judgment's right there again. Oh, how could I have let this happen all these years? And then in that moment, that compassion becomes just so essential to really be with all of those younger parts of self and bring the adult online to be like, no, like that, this is, I'm okay. I can hold this. I have capacity now. And I want to give credit, a huge credit to Carl Jung. This all comes from Jungian psychology, the concept of the shadow and of working with parts. And then the body of work that I've studied both in England and in the States here is called shadow work. And that was founded by Cliff Barry. My mentor, Corinne Green, is based in Sweden, and she's amazing as well. So just to give a shout out to the ones before me in the lineage.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what I got from the book was that it's very. I told you I felt it was like witchy. I would say
Uh-huh.
the question for the book was, "Am I a witch?" That came to me, and you have a better title for it. But when you actually look at it, any gift can be considered spiritual or connected. Even mental work, if you're able to do very complex mental work, wow, that's a gift as well. So there's not really a boundary, but still, when I read you, I had a feeling it was more going towards, yeah, what a fairy or a witch, a priestess would be doing. Can you tell me, based on your perspective, do we all have spiritual gifts? Because my father, going back again to the closest healer I have in my life,
Mm-hmm.
he believes that everyone can do what he does. It's just that no one develops it. But literally, what he does specifically, he says anyone can do this particular thing, and you should do it too, and your sister should do it. Do you feel it's the same for every gift that you cover in the book and every aspect? Anyone can become amazing at intuition, or do we have a path and there are specific gifts that we are?
Yeah. Yes. So, first, what I'll say is, well, I love those concepts, the archetypes, rather, of witch, of fairy, of priestess. And in my perception, we all contain it all. And that is held for me, those archetypes inside of myself, as well as masculine archetypes, more the emperor, the warrior, those sorts of energies are all part of me as a woman. And so in my being as a woman inhabiting this body, a soul inhabiting this woman's body, I I feel what is true for me in my experience, that yes, absolutely, that anyone in mankind can develop, can activate all kinds of spiritual abilities, that some of which we haven't even maybe imagined yet. They're maybe even outside of reach in our imagination. But many of them, if we just watch some of the popular movies about X-Men or all of those other superhero movies, there they are. We can imagine these things. And so why wouldn't we be able to actually do them? And so much of who we are has been shut down and numbed through trauma, through like modern synthetic technologies, through fluoride in our water, pesticides in our food, just to be really specific there. These things that are poisoning us. So our bodies have so much, like the toxic load right now is so high that it's no wonder that these things are shut down. Because when we actually become more attuned, our sensitivity increases. It's impossible to be in modern environments. It like no longer becomes, the body literally won't do it. In my experience, my body won't go certain places anymore. My body won't eat certain food. Like I would much rather fast than eat fast food. And so it's like that process isn't, again, easy or simple, right? It really is taking a step on a path to in a new direction, in a different direction than many are headed right now. But it's really fun. And it's getting to know that side of myself as I've given permission. It's opened up so much in who I am as a spiritual being.
I think the X Men, what's the name? Mention is not helping your case. That's why you use usually intuition and things that are closer to people's understanding and
Sure.
experience. For me,
Yeah.
I've always had trouble reconciling, for instance, what my dad does with science. Like
Uh-huh.
there's no explanation. And then later on, I saw some other things, but they're still not accepted by science. And
I would
so you
question
just
that
have to. On
actually.
one side, I believe what he does, and
There's some really cool research happening actually with the Heart Math Institute based in California.
mm,
And they've been studying intuition. They've been studying the heart and the electromagnetic field that our heart creates. So it's a field that's 100 times stronger than our brain that radiates out around our body about 6 feet. And they're asking the questions like, where does intuition come from, and how do we look at this with science, right? So there's some really cool work happening there. And then also, even like decades ago, the US government gathered up some folks who had psychic gifts, and they were studying, trying to understand how to harness people's power for like military uses and things like this. And so and I don't think that's the only government that's done that. And so there's a lot of curiosity, and there's information there that it, there are bridges, but you need to look for them between science and spirituality. And for me, what is science? It's that direct experience. It's my firsthand experience of reality. And so I run experiments all the time in my life, right? What is true for me? What can I trust? Can I trust something funded by an organization that has vested interest in the outcome of the scientific quote unquote research, right? Am I really going to put my trust in a big pharma study about a drug that they want to release? Like, of course, they want it to have good results, right? So instead, the
mm,
science that I really look at is my own direct experience.
I hear you. That's the point that most people do. And if you talk with the doctor, it's like, very nice,
Yeah.
not working for me. For I have to. The only way I could manage this thing is to silo myself in two silos. I have this silo that I can talk to you and embrace everything you say and enjoy it and believe in it, and then the other silo which is more scientific, and
I
they
never
cannot.
do that.
Otherwise, the conversation would be completely blocked. So I use the same identity parting that you do for the shadow work.
Uh-huh.
I use it intellectually to be able to handle those different kind of conversations, but so far it's not integrating. The only point that is starting to integrate for me is Michael Brown's work, The Presence Process, or Otto Scharmer, Theory U, where they're trying to explain this connection to the source, and they explain it very, very well on in organizational level, individual level, relationships, everything. And there, I think that's actually, and I think I told you about this, but I'm very excited about this because finally the two selves that I've been separating since my very young childhood
Yeah,
are finally meeting and be like, oh yeah, we have a framework we can discuss around.
I
But
love that.
depending on who I speak with, of my friends and family, I know which side I should be talking from. And even this framework that is integrating is not scientifically proven. Yes, there's work to understand, but there's no definite answers. And I think the point that you make is, yeah, there's no vested interest for those things to actually be proven because the spiritual teachers, they don't want to, that's not their interest to prove
Yeah,
it this way. Faith is important, connection is important. So why no? I was like, if you don't believe, it's okay.
Yeah.
So I don't see this coming to a solution in our lifetime. But anyway,
Well, I
I'm
appreciate your
embracing what you're saying.
yeah, you're holding a space of
It's
curiosity about yourself, which is so powerful to be able, even for me still, to just be my perspectives, my, let's say, call them beliefs, have changed so much in the last 10 years. Like, I never would guess that the things that I'm connected to now, I would have been connected with. And it's because I've allowed myself to grow and change that I'm not fixed on, oh, this has to be true. And inside of that space, there's so many options.
yeah. What I like is the possibility, and one way also I get to it, and I think that's one of the ways I connected to tarot, for instance,
Mm.
or fictions and stories. I think it's a magnificent tool for creativity because it breaks down your fixity in one particular framework. So what I invite people to do when they see people like you or stories like yours, it's just use it as a way to expand your mind, and like science fiction basically, because you can basically break the mold and see something that you would not be able to see. Otherwise we are closed into systems and we just redo the whole thing over and over again. And I think the easiest first step for people that are doubting it is to take it as a story and see what unfolds from there. That's what I would say is beautiful, and that's why I love the way you're writing the book, because you coming like the beginning of a chapter. What I understand is poetic. It's a story, and I can connect to this story even if the back end thought process that you have might not be completely aligned with me, because I connect to parts of myself that I cannot really connect through the word. That brings me to a question that I had from before.
Mm.
How do you use the body to do this shadow work? And how do you use the body to access the spiritual gifts? Sorry, it's a lot of
Yeah,
things I said
those are big
in a
questions.
short
And
amount of time.
it's always interesting for me to speak about the body's experience because there is a translation between the felt sense in my soma, in my body, and then how my mind translates that into words, even. I'll share personally that in the shadow work processes that I've gone through with mentors, either one on one or with groups, there has very often been some type of an emotional release that comes along the way, whether I tap into anger or fear or grief or shame. And so, in that process of letting that old, stuck emotional energy move through the body, it's a process of feeling, feeling the feelings there, and
Yeah, it's
actually
embodied.
giving space to what maybe I didn't have space to feel when I was younger. And so then on the other side of that movement of energy, there is a like landing back into myself where I can feel more of my own essence, my own power, my own life force energy flowing in my physical body. So the the nervous system is shifting, it's releasing things, it's coming into clarity, it's resetting. And so then as that old emotional energy gets cleared out, we could think of it as a clogged pipe, maybe for most people. Starting out is okay, the pipes are clogged. Right? And like layer after layer, the scum gets removed. And then at some point, it's wow, I have so much more energy now. I have so much more ability. I'm no longer afraid to inhabit my physical being, my physical body, because of how much it used to hurt to be in my body. And so, for a lot of us, walking around living just in the head up, completely disembodied, completely cut off from any sensation in the body because it's painful, because we have all this unresolved emotional pain. And so, then through that process of cleaning out the pipes, those old emotions move. that then opens up the space to contact more of our spiritual nature, because our spiritual nature is our bodies. Like, we're these souls, and in my orientation of reality, what I've come to know to be true, we are these souls that are inhabiting these bodies for these little brief instants in the grand scheme of the universe, right? That we're here on Earth and in this particular lifetime. And so we get to play here. When we figure that out, we're like, oh, I actually can play with this material world, right? In this material body that I have access to for this lifetime. And in that space, when all the old traumas and wounds and patterns aren't weighing us down any longer, then what emerges is this more, what I believe is our true nature as part of mankind. And what you asked before, do we all have access to all of these things? I think just absolutely yes. When we own it, when we step in, when we say, yes, this is what I choose, this is what I intend to use these gifts for the upliftment of all. I think that's a really key piece. We're not being like evil X-Men, right? Or whatever. We're like really looking towards love for guidance on what it means to have telepathic abilities or to channel other energies through our vessels or to work with time bending. When we really, it's not just because we can, but it becomes for me, an act of prayer. It's a devotion. Like, yes, I do this because I love this planet and I love like everything here. And I want to create more healing in the world. And so from that place, then things can activate that in my life I wouldn't have imagined, like I said, a decade ago.
I can feel the playfulness in you. I can feel the fun you're having every time we meet. You feel free, and I think that's the key.
Thanks for that
The
reflection.
be able to move and not being restricted, not being constrained. And I can understand as well because I'm trying to think what you, but you're trying to express feelings into thinking,
Yeah.
into words. So it's not easy, but I feel that it takes us so much energy to hold on to whatever we created back then.
Yeah.
We don't even notice it, but we are always in tension, trying. This is who I am. This is how people need to see me, etc.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of energy, even if we don't see it because we are used to it. But it takes so much energy to do these things,
Yes.
and it's actually easier to be letting go and be completely free. We don't never do it. I did it completely in some moments of my life, like a kind of Burning Man,
Uh-huh.
or festivals, or parties, or events, or just moments where you completely let go,
Yeah.
and it's beautiful. And embracing life with this energy is also amazing. Now you can't do all the type of jobs or functions in society with this energy, but clearly
Mm-hmm.
creatively it's amazing. It's amazing. And
Mm-hmm.
also it's it's creatively for yourself, but for others around you, it's super cool to have people like this. If everyone around you is completely free and you don't know what's going to happen, life becomes so much richer. Then, oh yeah, it's the guy is like this, and basically comes to your table and it is always like this. It's, I mean, for me, it's boring. For people, might feel safe, but I like the magic you're describing, and I think I can pick this up when you talk. And every time we meet, there's a lot of peace and there's also a lot of fun, and that brings me actually to identity, because even if you don't believe in those things, there is a component of identity where those mental models that you use to see your life and yourself are very freeing. And from an identity perspective, it's moving you towards flow and away from fixity. So from a psychological point of view, it's actually very good. So even
Mm-hmm.
if the gift doesn't exist, the mental model that enables the gift, as you say, is very useful for mental health and mental well-being and happiness.
Yeah. That's, again, one of the things that I just want anyone who's listening to this to know is that I have such deep respect for anyone's orientation whether someone is an atheist and super into science and that's your quote unquote God, or you're of another religious tradition or whatever, like that all is, it is so beautiful. It's part of the diversity of us. And so inside of that, I believe we get to play whatever game we choose. And so then we have that freedom to believe whatever we want to believe. And if I want to believe that unicorns are real, because for me they are, and that's not harming anyone, and it brings me a lot of joy to imagine unicorns sometimes and feel them, great. Like, when did we get, excuse my French, goddamn serious, Matt, about all of this?
Yeah.
Honestly, like
Yeah.
the games that people are put into of these, I work with folks almost weekly. I have a client in my rotation of folks that I'm working with regularly who comes in and they're just so deeply unhappy in their job. And they're just like, I know this isn't my purpose and I'm so unfulfilled, but like, how did I get here and where do I go from here? And it's sad, but my heart is broken all the time. As much as you reflect the inner peace and the playfulness, that's true. And I'm experiencing deep heartache at the state of things all the time. And I'm holding that
Mm.
duality in my existence daily. And so I really like a lot of what I wrote in Dare to Remember, which is the working title for the book. We'll see if it sticks, is just that. Can we just give ourselves permission to play a little bit more here and like
Mm.
get to choose what is the game that you're playing? Choose it. Really own it. If you're gonna work in a job you dislike deeply, own it. I am making this choice to be here. I wonder why I'm making this. Why? Get curious. Bring that curiosity in.
Yeah. So you say everyone has those gifts, spiritual gifts. We are the source, or we're God, or whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
And so obviously we have everything in us. Some of the things we're gonna express, others not. And the beginning of your book is really for people who have supernatural things in their lives. And that's why I thought about my friend. I was like, oh, she should totally connect with you. So you're gearing the book towards those people, like specifically because you feel there's a need. Do you think, I guess everyone can read the book, but those people would benefit more, you believe?
Yeah, it
Um,
is written with that in mind for folks who maybe have had experiences that are non-ordinary, who maybe have wondered if they're a little off their rocker at times or what's going on here. And for somebody who is that hasn't happened but they're curious in the subject matter, then it's certainly welcome as well to read, and it might actually activate their, again, thinking about who I've had as clients over the years. There are some folks that I've worked with where they're not having out of ordinary experiences, but they want to be, right? They know that they have capacity, they want to activate it. So it's great for folks like that too.
do you have an idea of what's the percentage of the population who has gifts like this? It's very rare, no?
Oh, I think it's much higher than we let on. I don't know of a number on it, but in my life, it's like most people that I know, I have these
Okay.
conversations with, and there's some level of things going on that are non ordinary. But we've culturally done such a great job of shutting it down. So let's talk for a moment about if I can bring it, if I can bring up as a topic about the ancestral wound for those of us with European ancestry of the witch hunts. You mentioned seeing me as a
Mm.
witch-like woman in the world, which I love that came to you. And so there is a collective wound around being perceived as an herbalist. Literally, the witches were herbalists, essentially, or connecting supernaturally with things, whatever that may be, talking to the animals or the river, or having a relationship, a special relationship maybe with fire or with the weather, right? These sorts of things that people were killed for. They were burned. Women and men were burned, hung, drowned, betrayed by their
Mm.
husbands, wives, best friends, neighbors. And in that, in the name of Jesus, which is the most absurd part of it, because he was definitely he was changing water to wine. I don't know what's not witchy about that. He was walking on water.
Yeah.
Come on. It's like the cosmic joke of that, of wow, guys, that how did that distortion occur? Okay. You take like the ultimate trickster
Good point.
witch and just like slaughter people in the name of him.
Yeah.
Crazy. So like in my own ancestry, right? I've done the work. I write about it in the introduction of this, one of the many healing movements that I had for myself and my ancestors around the deep seated fear of being out there, of having a gift, of
Yeah.
being embodied in my power. And the literally my body shaking through, trembling through the fear of what if they burn me? And I've heard others speak about this. I know I'm not alone in this. And getting to the
So you
place where
remember,
it's just
your
like,
body remembers this.
my body remembers it. Yeah, because my ancestors' bodies remember this. And I have indigenous to First Nation ancestry here in the US as well, with a couple different tribes here. And what happened also to
Hmm.
those medicine women and men who also were slaughtered in the colonization of what we now call the United States. And so it all
Hmm.
throughout my lineage, there's this memory of it is not safe to be seen in weirdness. Just don't go there.
Yeah.
Just be normal and
Yeah.
do the things that others want you to do. And so that work as well, the ancestral healing work for me was such a huge part of the journey, is continues to be.
I feel where it's safe, it's in art because you can disguise what you talk about as a story that people will be like, oh, it's just a story. But it's not. I mean, that's what you feel as being your healing, ancestral healing, and all the trauma you carry. And I believe that one of the problems we have as well is that we don't have those bonfires where we meet with the community or the village and tell stories to each other. Our conversations are much more, at least mine, maybe other people are luckier, but we don't tell each other stories. We consume them through mainstream Netflix and the other ones for the most part. And it's probably we're missing this kind of space where those stories can be told and nothing is ridiculous because it's a story, and some people will connect with you and maybe you would not be that direct, but your story might resonate. I'm like, was it true what you said? Because for me it's
Mhm.
true. Or when we had this conversation about mushrooms and you were trying to see what I thought about it before engaging with me on the topic, I think we all have this kind of things where there are
Mm,
things that we don't talk with everyone because we don't want to alienate. It's not that we want to hide, just we want to have an
mhm,
interesting conversation, and that might block the conversation.
mm,
And yeah, I think that one of the problems is, I think the podcast, I want to make it because of sense making, because we
mhm,
miss places where we can go deep into this kind of conversation and see where they lead. But there's also a lack of storytelling on
mhm.
of our own stories. What is my story? What do I carry with me? And either make it direct like we are doing right now, or make it completely, yeah, fiction. Like sounds like it's fiction, but it's isn't. It's not 100% fiction ever.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that awareness, Matt. Really feeling that there's so much power in myth, and to have the current structures giving us those myths. Like almost the image I'm getting as I say that is like nursing on a bottle of like formula versus having our own story that we are telling,
Mm.
and how easy it is to
Yeah.
just digest this fast food version of myth
Yeah.
instead of really living our story.
And
We're living through these characters on the screen.
yeah. Yeah. And we might end up having the same archetypes and the same kind of stories, but the fact that we are saying ours and it's people around us, I think it has this power of it's true for us. It's not just something completely. It feel we are disconnected from actually the truth of the story because it feels something foreign. I feel.
Yeah, that's part of.
Do you know of other books? Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Go for it. Go for it. No, I don't want to interrupt you. I think we were done. Come, please.
Yeah, it's let me find the thread.
I was telling about the disconnection we have with what you call the fast food stories. So basically, the myths are developed centrally, let's say, and we all consume them. And it doesn't feel true to us because it's not our story that we're telling, even if the same archetypes are present or the same hero's journey are present.
Yes. Yeah. And it's that going back to shadow work, it's the golden shadow sometimes getting projected on maybe a character that we admire in a film. And instead of going out into our lives and actually living that embodiment of what are the characteristics that we so love about that actors,
Mm,
superhero, X-Men, whoever it is, right? Instead of being like, yeah, I can be that, we create the othering of it. Oh, it's this other, non this fictional character that is that way, not me. I couldn't possibly. And
yeah.
and instead of seeing that, like you're saying, in our brothers and sisters and our friendships and our close community, if we're not sitting around the fire sharing those stories, we're not being inspired by people we directly know who are embodying those things. Right. And so, yeah, the importance of getting together with folks, having deep, intensive retreat experiences, ceremonial
Mm,
experiences, like going through that fire metaphorically, or maybe it's a fire walk that we're gathering
mm,
around and doing it and actually having that connection with ourselves.
yeah. I almost feel that. So I like the fact that there's big budget on Hollywood to craft the perfect story and make it beautiful. Because if we were to do like theater or drama in each 150 person community, the show would not be that cool. So I like the fact that it's centralized. Maybe there's a component we can keep centralized as long as the myths are serving whatever identity or organizational, societal model we want. But on top of this centralized thing we consume all, assuming that it's a beautiful thing, we need this second step, maybe not with the actor, but with people who are, as you said, embodying this particular archetype in our community so that we can model them, do some kind of peer work so that it feels less foreign and more connected to us.
Yeah,
Mm.
love that idea. I wonder how we will begin to return to our roots more and more. It's already happening. But that idea sounds like a return to the roots.
Mm. Keeping the high production budgets of Hollywood because you can do crazy things in sci-fi and all the special effects. I'm a fan, so I don't want to lose.
Yeah.
Do you know any book similar to the one you wrote? So for people who are struggling with their out of the ordinary identity,
Mm.
because I guess if I have a gift of intuition or I'm good at math or philosophy or whatever,
Mhm.
it's not a problem. But if I have one of those gifts that are like attacked in conversations or people start to ostracize you and say, okay, no, you need to go away because it's weird, right?
Mhm.
You stop people stop trusting you maybe, or they start questioning everything you say because you said that particular thing.
Mhm.
Do you know other people that helping such individuals? Is it something, is there a big community of witches out there on Reddit or Facebook or whatever? I don't know. How do you guys organize yourselves and help each other?
Yeah. So I've read a lot of self-help, personal development, leadership skill type books over the years, things related to spirituality. And I did write this in part to fill in a gap that I hadn't seen met yet, which is
Hmm.
more of It's part spiritual autobiography, so I tell a lot of stories from my life. I also look at it as a map to orient to the landscape. One of the things that has been really fun about my journey is that it's been so uncertain and mysterious and all these twists and turns I never could have guessed. And I had access to a number of very skilled mentors. And I recognize that not everyone, and they were able to help guide me. And not everyone is going to have, depending on where you are, what your income is, those sorts of things, not everyone is going to have access to the mentors that I was blessed to have. And so I wrote this really imagining someone who's maybe a little bit isolated in their experience. Maybe they haven't found community yet and they're looking for where that community is. And for sure, actually, if you haven't already, check out Joe Dispenza's work. Matt, are you familiar with this guy? He's
I
he's
am. I read Becoming Supernatural and I'm a fan.
Okay, yeah, there you go. So yeah, like that's a huge community of folks really intentionally looking at how to use meditation and breath and intention to change reality, right? And that's a fun one. And then I was pretty shocked to actually find community. I moved back a couple years ago to northern Michigan where I grew up, from the West Coast, California. And I have been so grateful to meet awesome community of priestesses, witches, wild women, wild men, just very cool folks. Just
On the same village, all of you are like
in
this?
very close proximity in a very rural area, and literally just from letting myself be seen as who I am in the community, and we've just found each other, and it's a huge surprise. I never would have guessed it.
So you didn't choose the space because of this, but you discovered after the fact
Yeah,
that people were
yeah. When
around
I
you.
moved away right out of high school from this region, I didn't think there was anyone who was on a spiritual journey of any kind. And when I got back, there were all these little yoga studios and folks holding really cool healing events, grief rituals, and women's circles, different things like this. So I think that there really is more and more, even in the last 10, 20, 30 years, more and more folks who are coming quote unquote out of the closet in around this.
Cool. How do you think people will find the book, and why do you think they will trust you? That's a difficult
Mm.
one.
Yeah, they're going to find it if it's meant to be.
Yeah.
I plan to market it. I don't have a plan yet for that, but I be putting it out into the world and just trusting that whoever needs it, they're gonna find it. How can you trust me? I trust myself, and I do my best to align with love and service every day. And one of the
Hmm.
invitations in the book is to trust yourself and to align with what your values are. And so that's again and again, I'm saying that in the content. Notice what is your direct experience, what is true for you, what can you trust about yourself.
I think you pointed to Joe Dispenza's community. I understand what you mean in terms of the proximity to the intensity of the experiences that a witch would be having or creating in the world. So I hear you. Now, where I think you feel a gap in my mind, but I didn't do research, so I don't know. But the intuition that I have regarding this topic is that you will touch a lot of people like my friend who has had experiences that she could not explain. She was really
Mhm.
worried about them. She was very freaked out back in the days. It's like a conversation that was 5 6 years ago. So it's a long time conversation, but it had such an impact on me that I remember it, and I connected you. But I think those people specifically who don't have a practice, I don't think she had at that time, and are completely freaked out or don't know what it is and might just dismiss it. instead of all of us benefiting from it, depending on what it is. If it's a, I don't know, maybe it's a massage technique or some kind of, I don't know, they make you feel peaceful or happy or whatever, energy work, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I think those people would benefit a lot from it. How did you come to the, like, basically, you have a lifetime of experiences. How do you boil all these experiences down to a book?
Great question. Oh, to be honest, so I leaned in deeply to one of the spiritual gifts that I write about. There's a chapter on what I call shape shifting. And
Hmm.
inside of that idea of shape shifting is the concept of channeling and thinking of my body as an empty vessel, almost like a flute. Rumi talked about being like a flute that the divine would play. And that's really how I seek to live each day. Even in the course of this conversation, I'm listening to what wants to come through my vessel and trying my best to get the ego to give the ego a bone to chew on while we're having this conversation. And really holding the question and the prayer of what medicine can flow through me in any moment. And so the process of writing, I was inviting myself to be a channel. I actually had a poem that I read each time before I wrote. That was an invocation to just, how can I be of service? Is really the inquiry of this poem. And
Do you have
so,
it? Is it a long poem?
no, it's short. Would you like to hear it?
Can you read it?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be
Yeah,
happy.
yeah, totally.
It's
Yeah, I would love
let
that.
me pull it up. It's at the very end, and I include it on the last page of the book for folks to know what the prayer was that I was holding as I wrote. So this is it.
I love it.
With gratitude, I form this prayer. Humbly in service, I formally dare to write true love upon this page, remembering my inner sage, remembering the codes and keys, weaving geometry as the bees, collecting nuggets within my heart to paint this page and form this art. I earnestly present these hands to write the words to shift these lands. Use me, Great Spirit, angels, sprites. Use me, love me, day and night. Thank you for your wisdom's flow. I take no credit, nothing I know, besides the pleasure of letting go and my own heart's desire to grow.
Wow, that's cool. Do you have one for every morning too? It's amazing.
Thank
It's
you.
very freeing for to writing. For writing, it's very freeing.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say I wrote, quote unquote, that poem. I received it from, I work with the goddess Bridget. She's a Celtic goddess. Poetry is one of her domains. And so I literally sat down and I asked Bridget to help me receive something that I could create a little ritual each time before I wrote. And so in that
Hmm.
way, it was like, as I was writing, the stories from my life would come in very organically. It wasn't like I was trying hard to decide. I didn't make a timeline of my life and all the events and try to pick out. It wasn't cognitive. Yeah.
That's what I would have done.
Yeah, they're just different ways of doing things, right? One is very feminine, one is very masculine, we could say, right? And in my journey, I'm looking at how can I balance those parts within myself of the masculine and feminine. And so the masculine part of my process of writing was the structure of the poem and lighting a candle at the beginning of each session, no matter what. I did that every single time, even making edits so far in the book. And in that process, that created, okay, now the container is open for my feminine to just receive what wants to be written through me. And then the process of writing,
So it's not.
the structure of sentences and editing,
It.
that becomes very masculine too, in
Hmm.
my experience.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Is it the same candle you lighted for today?
Yeah, one's
It's a
like
different
this.
one.
Yeah, big, tall beeswax
Okay,
candles. I love them.
cool,
Yeah.
cool. The one of the things you wrote on the book was the alignment with the seasons. And is it a way for you to structure, but you don't really need to respect the seasons, or is there a very important aspect of the time of the year and the practice that you talk about?
Love that question. Thank you for noticing that piece. I feel the seasons were included in the structure of the book in terms of basically for folks to understand what we're referring to. There are 20 spiritual gifts that have chapters, and they're broken into the 4 seasons, beginning in winter. And then there's a journey that the reader goes on through the cycle of the seasons where different gifts are emphasized. And so in the winter, for instance, it's a great time to connect with sovereignty because this is a very inward process of who am I and what do I stand for and what is important in my vision. And in the darkness of winter, in the cold, there's actually a lot of opening inside of ourselves to be present to our sovereignty. And then the other kind of foundational gifts come into play there in the winter time because that's where we can go inward, and then we can also start to just plan a little bit what wants to happen later in the seasons. And then in the spring, we're ready to plant the seeds and hold those intentions and nourish things into the summer as they're growing and they're thriving. And then in the fall, we're harvesting, but we're also letting go. We're preparing for that cycle again with winter coming. And so for me, that is a reminder of the cyclical nature of everything. And so it's less rigid of you should practice these spiritual gifts if it's spring, and more of an invitation to like, is it spring in the middle of your day? And what's needed there? Or is it spring in this chapter in your life, in your career? And what's needed there? And so it's less of a formula and more of an invitation to be in contact with what's present for you in the cycles of your life. Watching the moon, if you're a woman, being connected with your cycle, with your moon time, literally, what the hormonal changes in your body. Men have it too, actually, a little bit different, but a little bit of hormonal change throughout the month. And then the wherever you live, whatever the seasons are like there, for me in northern Michigan, we get 4 beautiful seasons. They're all very different. But when I lived in California, there was still the cycle of each day and that shift from day to night. And so being present to that in our lives is the call there. And for me, that is like when I talk about my spirituality, it's always changing. And it, and yet there are these cycles too that I observe. And so it's that simple in a sense to just be present with what is happening now.
What I hear is very similar to the part of the identity. Again, the De Bono thinking hats. It's like the more vocabulary you have in mental models that you can apply. You don't open that much because in the end they are still fixed, but you have such a broad range that you can start touching not the unlimited, but you can start expanding because it gives you vocabulary. And with this vocabulary, you can do sentences and text, let's say, with something bigger. Because I think the main problem is when we have a limited number of mental models or categories and we just stick to, I think they call it personal constructs, and you always stick to different personal constructs. And when people come in or ideas come in, you just like bucket them, and that's how you see the world. And the more buckets you have, the less easy it becomes to categorize because you have such a wide range. And then I think by expanding your number of personal constructs or categories, then you can basically give them up and be like, this is actually not useful. Let's just connect directly to the thing because it became too big. I feel that's what's happening to me right now.
Tell me more about that process for you.
I don't know, like doing the research for Noesun opens so many different boxes. And I've always been very research oriented. So I would be like, okay, what does the science say? And going in that process of learning about so many different personality, identity, for instance, identity and personality tests, there's so many different ones. And then, so if you only use one or two, you can be like bucketing people. But then when you use, I don't know, let's say 10 or 15, you can't do this anymore. And actually, one of the things they tell you is don't bucket people when you have an identity test or personality test, because by doing so, you limit yourself and you limit the other person.
Yes.
Goes with the seeing your child as a blank page. Every morning is a different child. Don't remember what he did yesterday, because then you would be hindering his development, because for him it's a totally new day. And if you remind him with your behavior or with your words what he was doing yesterday, you limit him, right? So this thing as a to be a parent and learning so many different buckets or categories is starting to free me from these constructs, because they're no longer helpful when you can't map the world anymore. It's easy when you can map the world and you have those different categories and okay, I bucket people. And it's super useful in a job, but I'm learning that to live, it's not that great. It's one of the sources of limitations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I feel that what you're calling with the different mental models or frameworks you use in the book, and there's the 4 seasons, you spoke about the adult, the young one, the two adults and the young one. You speak in the book as well as the 4 steps: packing the bag, going in the forest, or no, walking in the meadow, going in the river, and the last one I don't remember, but those different
The
things are also
wilderness at
ways.
the end, yeah.
Sorry.
Becoming the wilderness is the last section. Yeah.
Yes, and that's the beautiful one. Yeah. So yeah, those ones are also ways to, yeah, just get a grasp and be able to visualize for the reader and for everyone. Just okay, this is how I can help. It helps me think about this. It helps me feel as well. It gives me a container to process the experience you're giving people.
It's so important what you're sharing there. Thank you for that, Matt, because it's like we it's natural for our minds to look for patterns and to try to categorize things. It's been very helpful over the generations to do that. What is safe and what is danger? And I want to be able to identify something that might be a threat to my life. So I'm going to categorize things, right? This very good, this very bad, whatever. And yeah, to not be too hard on that part of ourselves, but also being just present with somebody in this moment. I love what you're sharing about, and I know you have a beautiful baby. And so to be trying that on in your role as a father, of just each day is fresh. How can I show up without expectation on this being in front of me, without things needing to be a certain way in our relationship, right? But be present to what is here right now. And that's something I remind myself of often in whatever I'm doing. What is actually here right now? And how can I meet that?
I think I'm bringing this up because of the stakes that are really high with the baby. You don't make a mistake. So that's one of the things that's stuck in my mind with the Montessori training.
Yeah.
But the same applies to adults. And when you give this liberty of giving the person, today I show up, I don't really care what we spoke about in the past. I really care about what's going to happen now.
Yeah.
And it's very freeing because I don't have an agenda.
Yeah.
I have zero agenda. I don't have an audience. I don't have any financial
Yeah.
interest. There's nothing. There's just you and me. We can talk about anything.
I love.
And this is super freeing. And to me, it brings me back to experiences like improvisation, like acting. And it's the same. It's so magic. And it's the same also we were talking about dinners or festivals, like when there's no expectations and you just show up and whatever happens, you're like, yes, and thing. It's just amazing. And it's more beautiful for me to hear, yes, your story, but whatever forms in the moment that you didn't prepare, it's half
Yeah,
baked. This is more useful for me and this is more beautiful. And I can find myself more in those things than in a pre-planned speech
for sure.
that you're gonna say it. I don't know if the book is selling and you will know, oh, those are the points that are convincing people from buying the book. Then
Yeah.
you will have the same interview 25 times in different places to be able to tell your story. And this really, it's interesting, but I'm more interested in what's happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's that for me, the feeling of surrender into the moment of, yeah, this sort of a space that's created, or each time I meet with a client, or each time I show up with a friend, and even retreats that I've organized, that I've had groups arrive at my home before for retreat. And literally the only thing that I have planned for 3, 4 days is how we're going to start. So
Wow, that's courageous.
I'll, I'll have my I'll have my agreements that we make as a group. Like I'll have that structure, very masculine structure to set the container. I'll have maybe the opening activity. But the way, for whatever reason, my process is sometimes is I won't get it until it's that moment. And then, oh, this is now what we're doing. Okay. And that's just how I work. And I try, like
It's cool.
I'll try to make a plan. I'll try to like gather information and have a little bit of a sense, because I my ego likes to know, right? It's not exactly, oh, this is all these people coming trusting me and I don't know what's going to happen. It's very vulnerable.
Do they know your process, or do they imagine that? No.
I've started
So they will know now.
I've started talking more openly about that process. Yeah. But yeah, like this year I haven't run any groups because I've been very focused on the book. But last year I did.
By the way, that doesn't turn me off.
Huh?
As a potential client, that doesn't turn me off.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I don't think it would turn me
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
No.
I've been nervous to speak about it for sure, because it's like who
Mm.
want it, and it's challenging to people like to have an agenda. What am I stepping into here? And I'm like, I can have an
Mm.
intention, but if I have an agenda, I'm basically, in my experience, I'm telling God, God, I know better than you what's going to happen this weekend. Like, it doesn't matter what might be in the highest good of everyone who's coming. I've got my plan. And when we do that, when I do that, I'll speak from my experience. It's like there are things that show up in the space that I've been able to follow that I wouldn't have if I had a preconceived idea of this is what needs to happen here. And but that is my spiritual practice, is this deep listening to what wants to come through me in this space. And so it's even now I'm planning a journey down to Central America, and I'm gathering information from what folks there are wanting. And I can see the part of me looking for an agenda for our time together. I'm like laughing at that part of
Mm.
myself. That's not how you work best.
It's interesting. I feel there is mastery involved, so it's easy to be like this when you're confident, when you have done those kind of experiences before. So even if you tell people, like, they know what you've done so far, and so I think the agenda is almost like a scaffolding exercise that you might need to feel legitimate and confident and everything.
Yeah.
But in the end, when you know the feeling you want to bring, you're confident of your role in the process. Yeah, why do you need an agenda? I think also there's a game of, and that's part of the mastery, is when you've done so many things so many times, you have kind of a toolbox.
Mm.
And so if there's a downtime or you don't know what to do because there's nothing flowing, you can always retreat back into a pattern, or like a beautiful pattern, but a pattern you've weaved in the past. So to me, it's more like you being humble and everything, but hey, I've done it so many times, I don't really need to plan anymore. I think there's this part as well. Beyond, I think I feel you with intuition, and for me, this is an inspiration. So I'm not downplaying what you're saying. I think it's super important, and I'm the young usually of the retreat, and I work with Sylvia, for instance, was the yin, total yin,
Uh-huh.
and so yeah, it depends on who I work with, but usually I like to have someone more yin and more like
Yeah,
a more maternal figure and more flowy,
that's great.
because I'm
Yeah. I want to be clear too that just because this is my process, I think there's so much value in having a really well structured and organized experience. For instance, I went through a women's initiation program that was 9 months long, and we had 8 weekends together. And those weekends were planned. A group rotated through every year. So I was, I think, the 12th cycle of it. So it had been evolving each year, but each weekend was like exquisitely planned. And that brought also a depth and a richness to the container. Now, probably at the beginning of that, I would say that there was more of my process maybe involved, but even thinking of Wim Hof retreats or ceremonial work where there's that structure and each time it's the same, that also creates this beautiful, the energetic groove of the power of the experience, that it's just a different thing. I don't think one is better or worse. It's just at this point in my life, that's the process I've been invited into, and maybe that'll change in the future. We'll see.
Yeah, it makes me think about two things as well. One, I remember, I don't know, I've been so touched by Kubrick's work. I think he's producer or realizator, Stanley Kubrick. And I could
Yes.
see in a museum in Barcelona, I could see his paperwork, and he was basically planning everything. He had like big tables. And to me, when I think about retreats, I think about the five senses. What is going to be said? What won't be said? What is the feeling? There's so many layers to the experience that there's this beauty as well. When you're very young like me, there's this of playing with all those parameters, and I get crazy about it. Then obviously you adapt and you need to have this flexibility in the moment,
Yeah.
but that gives you this, yeah, it's like playing so many instruments, and you try to play everything, and it gives you that awareness. At least it gives me this awareness. And I think the other thing about planning that I like, some people won't open up the first time they do an experience. And so if you do it the same way over and over again, they might feel safe and get something totally different. And then that opens up the question of who am I? Because I'm not fixed. The process is fixed, but I'm not fixed. And so it opens something different. So there's safety and also an opening of the self, and you let go as well of your fixity, let's say.
Yeah.
Those are the two things that come to me when I think about planning.
Definitely. Yeah, I've definitely seen that before where an experience, yeah, can be entered into multiple times and it's the same structure. And when we're familiar with that structure and we're letting ourselves trust it more because it's familiar, that, yeah, absolutely can be really potent.
One question that I'm very interested in is the physical space. And so I guess right now you're renting different spaces when you do your retreats, or you do it at home. So it's not, maybe the home is more like this, but it's probably not exactly what you want. It's more like you have your experience and you have the space, and then you see how to improvise something with the space you're given. If we were to design the perfect space for you, what would it look like? What are the key things that are super important to you?
Mm.
And maybe, yeah, so there's the, like, the longing for a beautiful space, and also the frustration of current spaces. I think those are the two ways you can
Uh,
touch on to this perfect physical space you're looking for. I'm
yeah.
interested in that.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a bit, like the first time we ever connected, just the setting, how crucial that can be. And in so currently I actually, my space where I have held retreats and groups and clients come here, it's very similar actually to what if I were to design something custom, in terms of it has a large room upstairs that has cathedral ceiling, so very, very high ceiling. And then the windows on that wall, there's like 2 stories of windows that open up and just look out into the woods. And so right now it's snowing, and just beautiful to sit there and watch the snow fall this time of year. And
Is it your home?
it's my home, yes. Yep. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, and there's also a little sauna out back with a wood-fired sauna that's been amazing, and just surrounded by forest. And so I am so blessed, and it really was divinely orchestrated for me to land here in this nest and be based here for now. What I do envision for the future would be a separate building that is maybe made of more like natural building materials, something maybe like straw bale. I'm really interested in structures that are round or have more curves, bringing in more of that feminine cyclical energy in the design of a space. And I have sketches for what I'm describing. I've sketched it out already. And it would have, again, high ceilings, maybe radiant floor heating, fired by a wood stove, so maybe no electricity, or maybe solar, something like this. And it would be a temple space dedicated to nature. So I envision that there would be these different stained glass window panels that have, maybe one is a hummingbird, and maybe one is a black bear, and then the next one is a rose, and all around just those reminders. So even in the winter time, there would be those reminders of in this ecosystem, what's all around. And just a space for people to, like, really, for me it's important to have space for full expression in that process of embodiment, using movement, pounding our feet on the floor in dance or sound expression, whatever kinds of primal wild sounds want to come through, having space for people to get more into their animal body as a way to connect with themselves is really, really huge for me in my work. So, yeah, being there on the land, having fire nearby, and either fire pit, another sauna, who knows. So that's something that my heart holds, is a dedicated space for groups to be in a nature temple like that, which I have it already in very many ways, but maybe another version of this vision down the road.
So it looks like you already have the perfect space, at least for the size of the groups that you have.
Yeah.
So it's more like when you scale up, you can
Yeah.
have another building and then another one.
Yeah.
Interesting. What's the next step with the book? Where do you see it going right now?
The next,
Because the last time we talked, it was very yin and let's see what happens.
yeah.
Does today contribute to anything?
The next step is I have for the first time printed a hard copy of it. So I have started reading through it myself, just not looking at the screen for the first time. And so very fun to hold it in my hands, 186 pages. And
Can you show me?
what's that?
Can you show it to me?
Oh, it's upstairs.
Is it nearby? Okay, forget about it. It's okay.
But I can. I plan to read it, and then I'm going to continue to just pray on the next step in terms of publishing, like approaching a publisher, self-publishing. I talked to a friend recently who suggested that self-publishing was actually faster way to go to just get it out in the world. I would like to maybe have an editor look at it. We'll see. There's some things that I have out there in the mix, but in some ways it's been so fun to have some friends and former and current clients read the draft that it is now currently and give feedback. And yeah, I feel pretty ready for it to be out in the world. So soon.
Lovely. And what kind of experiences at the moment you do different experiences and they are intuitive. So I understand you cannot give me an agenda that I got. But if you were to tell me the key elements that are coming in again and are scoping whatever you're doing, or like what's the container?
Yeah.
What stays every time?
Yeah. So really the containers that I hold are very focused on personal growth and healing, on coming more into our hearts, like actually inhabiting the heart chakra and opening it, having alignment in our lives with what is our purpose here, really stepping into our gifts and our full potential in that way. And so working with folks to come into maybe it means a career transition. Maybe it means quitting a job and coming into something that's more aligned. That has shown up a lot in my work. And so, yeah, really I believe that we simply are in a moment where there's so much untapped potential inside of ourselves and collectively, but we're right here and it's happening that more and more of us are embracing like really who we are and really choosing to remember. So one of the things in the book I didn't send you is that section. It's the manifesto of remembering, and that it's like a bit of a call to action. Yeah, like how can we really step in here, gang? Let's do this. We're here for a reason. We know that. And time to show up to it.
So the remembering is again, remember you're the source and you have it all
Yeah.
and just you're enough. This is the remembering, right?
Yeah, remember who you are. You're divine.
Yeah.
You're perfect. You have
Mm.
everything you need. There's
Yeah.
no actual problem. Just like how can we show up to this game and bring more light here? Okay, you're doing it.
Fast forward 10 years. What do you do?
In 10 years from now, what am I doing?
Yeah, like project yourself further. Because I can see the next few months, maybe even, no, maybe not the years, but I can see the next few months. But if you go much further, what do you bring to the world?
Yeah, yeah. There are some big questions for me there, to be honest with you right now. There are a couple ideas I've had that would take me in slightly different trajectories than this one with the book and with my current client
Hmm.
work. So I don't know that I don't know what's going to come there, and I am not ready to share the vision in detail. But what I will say is that with what I've seen so far in this life, I'm very curious about working potentially with children more, maybe designing some things to support with trauma with little ones. And so we'll see what may come through there. I work with a lot of parents, which is so fulfilling to me to be able to have like teaching a parent a tool that they can then use with their littles is really really fun. Yeah, I've had some visions that we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Maybe Am I a Witch, a version for children, illustrated.
The stories, the animal stories in the book, there's an idea that those may become
Mm,
children's books as well.
totally,
Yeah, that'd be fun.
totally. I know someone who draws very well.
Ah,
If you need.
link us up if you will. That'd be great.
Yeah, I will. I will. And can I ask you to read the Earthworm story? Because I was going to
Yeah.
read it, but honestly, the way you read was beautiful, and
Oh, are you
I
sure?
don't. I would love to. I would love to. Oh
You
yeah, I'm
don't want
sure. I'm
to
totally sure. I loved hearing it, so I'd rather have the listeners hearing it
Okay,
than hearing me with my
sure.
accent.
The accent
If
is
you're
so
okay
fun,
with it.
but I would be happy to read the Yeah, so this is from the beginning of the chapter on healing and how thinking about how we heal. And I know one of your reflections, if I can share, Matt, about this was feeling like, oh my goodness, there's so many ways to heal and it can be so complex and just so big, right? Which is true. There can be a lot there. But the earthworm has a really cool message for us that in terms of how immense the healing journey can sometimes seem. So here it is. Earthworm lived deep under the place where the tree roots became tree trunks and the mycelium network sprouted their mushroom fruits. She was very happy there in the dark. Most days, she would find herself quietly munching through living soil, creating more vibrancy and space through the pathway of her body. But today, she found herself in a most unusual situation. There were mounds of rotting food scraps. Some pockets were too moist and mushy, and others were too dry and choked with mold spores. Perhaps, Earthworm thought, I have found what my earthworm ancestors called a compost pile. And indeed, she had eaten her way into a compost pile that was not very well tended. The compost pile in my very own garden. It was right of her to think that this place was a disaster, because surely it was. Somehow, and most extraordinarily, Earthworm paid no heed to the messiness of the mess. She simply showed up and did what she did every day. She took one bite at a time. She moved slowly, being with her experience fully. In this way, she created living soil where there was none. She brought wholeness where there was disconnection. She healed what was most disastrous in the darkness and humbly. After all, she had lived in the earth her entire life, and so her path was clear.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you,
And
Earthworm.
maybe, yeah, yeah, totally. Another archetype or another mental part
Teacher
to do the work.
for me, like a
Yeah,
mentor, an animal teacher.
totally.
Yeah.
And maybe one last question for the road before I let you go.
Yes.
Would you say that I was thinking about this earlier in the conversation and I didn't tell you,
Yeah.
but the curiosity goes into the particular gifts and the shape shifting, especially with the names that are very compelling, attractive. You want to know more. Would you say that they will all unfold anyway if you do the inner work, like the kind of the inside out thing? Don't look for the gifts, just keep doing your work and everything else will just unfold, whether it's intuition or mathematics or whatever is your gift, it will just be there, it will flow.
Yeah.
Is that correct, or is there,
I think
what's
yes,
your view?
that's correct. And also the other way around too. So like for me, it was very organic as I was on my healing journey. These gifts started to activate because as I talked about earlier, I just had more capacity, more life force energy in my being to know who I really am. And if somebody is really dedicated to, say, they want to work with visibility and invisibility, for instance, maybe they want to have more of a platform and be seen, and then also have ways of creating healthy boundaries for themselves around those platforms, like you, for instance, with the podcast. You're just getting it started, but in time, maybe you play more with visibility. And so, if that were an intention somebody had, then organically there's going to be a healing component to the journey because stuff's going to come up. You're going to feel blocked, this and that. As we step in more and more to our gifts, then things also clear. So I think however it happens is perfect, that unfolding. And we don't have to try too
It's a
hard
dialogue.
to plan it. Just move towards what brings you joy. And you're going to find the places where it's
And
crunchy.
love it. And so your answer on visibility,
Yeah.
invisibility brings me to a question about metaphoric speaking and literal speaking.
Yes.
And that brings me back to my childhood and actually even not so long ago.
Yeah.
So my dad has fellow healers, and one of them is has visions of
Mhm.
things, and I've had always problems with that, trusting his visions. And so I've kind of, and he's always doing it in a story way and joking way. It's like there's a lot of humor around his stories, especially when you try to go deep into where does it come from and can I trust it? And he's always evasive. And it was a big problem for me because I'm searching for proof and truth, and I don't want to give faith I want to see first.
Yeah.
And so there was always this clash. And today in the podcast, you spoke about many different things.
Uh,
And as a listener, I can be like, is it metaphoric? Or is she truly shape shifting? Is it truly visibility, invisibility? Or is just a way of talking about different mental models? Are you going to lift the veil of mystery, or are you going to keep us on our toes?
I invite you and anyone listening to this to play whatever game you want to play. If you want to read the book and see it all as metaphor and you get something from that, awesome. If you want to read the book and take it really literally, and there are stories of very literal invisibility, shape shifting. I share a little bit more in the writing about some of this. Like, maybe it could be real.
I didn't plan this end, but I think it's a great end. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll just leave
Thank you
it
so
there
much,
for
Aria.
now. Thank
I
you,
love it.
Matt. It's
I love
really a
it.
pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the time. It's been a pleasure. Truly a pleasure. I wish that the book is published soon or whenever it needs to come, but I wish it's going to be soon.
I hope.
And I actually love the idea of a children book.
Yeah,
I think it's an amazing idea.
thank you.
And I wish us to do a retreat together in the near
I
future.
love it. You can hold
I
the
do.
yang, I'll bring the yin.
You can find out more about Aria Mae Everts on our website, ariamae.com.